It begins with a detail buried deep in wartime paperwork, an OSS memorandum dated January 27, 1944, stamped "Restricted Eyes Only." In neat typewritten lines, it references a proposed airdrop beyond acceptable operational limits into central Germany. No commander wanted to sign it. Too dangerous. Too political. Yet the document existed, and the name signed at the bottom belonged to some of the most daring operatives the Allies had ever recruited. This was the quiet birth of a mission that even senior officers later pretended they had never heard of, one of 5 clandestine insertions into the heart of Nazi Germany that would test the limits of Allied intelligence. By early 1944, the Allied command faced a troubling intelligence gap. While aerial reconnaissance captured blurred glimpses of rocket launch pads and obscured factory complexes, ground-level confirmation remained elusive. Conventional spies inside Germany had been decimated by the brutal counterintelligence apparatus of the Gestapo and the Sicherheitsdienst. Washington, London, and Algiers all needed answers about the V2 program, about rumored underground complexes, about unusual rail shipments disappearing into the Harz Mountains. And so, in a secured room beneath Grosvenor Square in London, the OSS and SOE quietly selected a joint team for a mission they could never publicly acknowledge. The unit assembled under the provisional designation Halyard Detachment, Special Penetration Group. Its roots traced back to existing OSS operational groups, but its personnel had been filtered again and again. Veterans of covert Balkan insertions. A communications expert who had once sabotaged a German cable relay outside Leuven. 2 British SOE instructors fluent in regional German dialects. Their faces rarely appeared in official photographs. Their records often listed cover identities rather than true names. One operative later described it simply, "We were chosen because we were expendable, but capable enough to make the risk seem worth taking." Training intensified as spring approached. They drilled night parachute jumps over the English countryside, landing in fields that resembled German farmland, narrow, forest-linked, and treacherous. They learned to use miniature Mark V transmitters whose range fluctuated unpredictably under cloud cover. They memorized safehouse locations provided by anti-Nazi sympathizers whose fate would be sealed if the network was exposed. Every lecture ended with the same instruction. If compromised, you were never here. Your mission never existed. The primary objective focused on the Harz Mountains, an area where Allied analysts suspected something extraordinary was underway. Intercepted Luftwaffe maintenance logs hinted at increased fuel consumption near Nordhausen. Aerial photos showed entrances carved into hillsides, partially disguised by timber screens. Rumors from escaped forced laborers spoke of underground factories hidden from Allied bombers. The Allies believed these might house components for the V2 rocket or the new jet fighter designs rumored to be emerging from German engineering halls. Confirmation was essential. Without it, strategic planners were operating blind. The chosen drop date, March 3, 1944, coincided with a moonless night, ideal for covert entry but risky for aircraft navigation. The operatives boarded a modified B-24 Liberator flown by the 492nd Bomb Group, its bomb racks replaced with supply canisters. The pilot made a low pass over the North Sea before turning southeast toward Germany. Inside the pitch-black fuselage, the team sat silently, listening to the hypnotic drone of the engines as they mentally rehearsed every step of their mission. One operative later wrote in a diary fragment, "The quiet was the worst part. The men didn't talk. You could feel every heartbeat." As they crossed into enemy airspace, German searchlights lanced upward, though none swept directly across the B-24. The crew dropped to treetop height, skimming over darkened villages and frozen farmland. A red lamp blinked inside the aircraft. The men stood, clipped into static lines, and moved toward the open hatch. Cold wind tore through the compartment. Below them lay the Harz region, an expanse of forests, ridges, and shadow-covered valleys where every road and every farmstead remained under the watchful eye of the Reich. The jump was clean. Shoots blossomed silently against the darkness as the men descended into a clearing. They gathered quickly, buried their parachutes, and activated a prearranged signal lamp pattern meant for a contact from a small anti-Nazi network based near Wernigerode. But the contact never arrived. Instead, distant engine noise from a German patrol vehicle echoed through the trees. The team extinguished the lamp, grabbed their equipment, and moved deeper into the forest. A coded radio burst, just a few clipped phrases, was sent back to London at 2:41 HRs. Landed, movement compromised, splitting. It would be the last confirmed communication from 2 of the men. Dawn revealed the scale of the danger. German patrols were sweeping the region, likely alerted by an unusual flight path detected by radar stations. The team's carefully planned reconnaissance of the underground complexes now required improvisation. They burned non-essential documents and separated into pairs, each carrying fragments of the intelligence plan. Only one pair was spotted, shadows moving through fog near a narrow logging trail. Within minutes, they had vanished into the forest beyond German reach. The disappearance of those operatives marked the first crack in the mission's foundation, a mystery that would deepen with every subsequent drop. And as British listening posts attempted to decipher the lone coded burst, commanders in London realized they had initiated something far more dangerous than anticipated. The story of the first HARS insertion spread quietly through OSS channels, whispered in hallways and coded in sparse after-action notes. Yet, instead of halting the operation, the disappearance of two operatives only hardened the resolve of Allied intelligence. By mid-March 1944, reconnaissance aircraft flying over central Germany detected new activity around the Nordhausen region, more railcars, more smoke plumes, more camouflage nets draped over suspicious mounds of earth. Something was accelerating inside the Reich, and the Allies could not afford blind spots. Thus, the second and third drops were approved within days, targeting two industrial corridors vital to Germany's war machine, Düsseldorf and Kassel. The mission parameters changed dramatically for these insertions. While the HARS team focused on underground facilities, the Düsseldorf and Kassel teams were tasked with verifying factory output, forced labor conditions, and rumored clandestine supply chains feeding the V-2 and jet propulsion programs. The stakes were as political as they were military. Washington wanted proof authentic enough to influence strategic bombing priorities. London wanted confirmation that their resistance contacts had not been compromised by SS infiltrators. And hovering over every decision was the fear that Germany's new weapons could shift momentum at a critical moment. The Düsseldorf team, composed of 3 OSS agents and 1 SOE operative fluent in Rhineland dialects, jumped just after midnight on April 12, 1944. Their landing zone, a narrow patch of farmland near Rattingen, sat on the outskirts of the industrial Ruhr. Fires from recent Allied air raids still smoldered in the distance, casting an eerie glow across the horizon. The team moved quickly, guided by a local contact known only as Frau L., a shopkeeper whose husband had been imprisoned for anti-Nazi activities. She led them to a cellar beneath her boarded-up home, where they spent the daylight hours hiding among crates of canned vegetables and radio parts. Their reconnaissance began the following night. Wearing workmen's coats and carrying forged papers, the agents navigated the bomb-scarred districts surrounding the Krupp and Mannesmann factories. What they saw confirmed Allied suspicions. Laborers hauled machinery into camouflaged annexes. Trucks loaded with crates marked electrical equipment left at irregular hours, and soot-stained workers spoke in hushed tones about a new priority production line operating under SS supervision. The team managed to sketch the outlines of the buildings and map the rail routes that fed the factory complex. Intelligence soon relayed back to London through shortwave bursts. Their work was successful, efficient, and by covert standards, almost routine. The story in Kassel was starkly different. This team, 2 Americans and 1 British operative, landed on the far side of the Habichtswald, a forested region west of the city. Kassel had long been a hub of German armaments manufacturing, housing the Henschel works responsible for producing the formidable Tiger II tanks. The OSS believed a resistance cell there had been quietly smuggling out production data. But by the time the operatives reached their designated safehouse, they sensed something was wrong. The contact was late. The code phrase exchange felt forced. And inside the attic where they were told to hide, they found signs of a hurried departure: mattresses overturned, food left half-eaten, and a burnt scrap of paper bearing only one legible word: Gefahr, danger. Unknown to the team, the Gestapo had cracked part of the Kassel resistance network weeks earlier, capturing several key members and turning others into double agents. The OSS operatives had walked into a trap engineered with painstaking patience. Their capture was never documented in full. Post-war German archives mention a special transfer of unidentified prisoners from Kassel to an SD interrogation site near Eisenach. A fragment of an Allied debriefing file references an American pair believed compromised beyond recovery. The third operative's fate remains a blank space in the records. No bodies were recovered, no names appeared in war crimes testimonies. For historians, this disappearance has become a chilling mystery in the chronology of OSS actions, one of the few missions where every operational detail seems to dissolve into speculation. What makes the Kassel drop especially haunting is the radio message the team attempted to send shortly before their capture. A British Y station at Scarborough intercepted a brief, garbled transmission around 3:17 hours on April 18. Only two phrases were clear: network unsafe and orders incorrect. Analysts debated the meaning for days. Were they warning London that the resistance cell had been compromised? Or were they signaling a deeper problem, perhaps falsified intelligence that had steered them into enemy hands? Even today there is no definitive answer. Meanwhile, the Dusseldorf team completed their mission and exfiltrated through Belgium. Their intelligence would eventually shape bombing strategies against the Ruhr, contributing to significant disruptions of German production. But within Allied command circles, their success was overshadowed by the silence from Kassel. The contrast between the two operations sharpened a growing dilemma for the OSS. How many risks were acceptable in enemy territory where networks were fragile and German counterintelligence was ruthlessly efficient? And yet, the need for deeper, more precise intelligence only increased as the war approached its pivotal summer. By late April 1944, planners were already preparing the fourth drop, one that would take operatives into the Bavarian forests, where another layer of secrets awaited. In the spring of 1944, as Allied bombers pounded German cities with increasing force, another war unfolded quietly beneath the canopy of Europe's forests, a war of shadows, coded messages, and disappearing agents. After the disastrous outcome in Kassel, the OSS and SOE faced a stark truth. The deeper their operatives pushed into the Reich, the thinner the line between success and catastrophe became. Yet the urgency of the intelligence gap grew. Reports hinted at hidden fuel depots, clandestine transport corridors, and high-level resistance circles operating at the edges of Bavaria, information too valuable to ignore. Thus began preparations for the fourth drop, a mission that would test the limits of covert infiltration. The Bavarian forests were a world unlike the industrial corridors targeted in previous missions. Dense, ancient, and threaded with narrow logging trails, the region provided both concealment and danger. German radar stations along the Danube detected unusual aircraft signatures nightly, and Feldgendarmerie patrols combed the border between Thuringia and Bavaria for suspected deserters and enemy agents. Allied planners understood the risks but believed the intelligence payoff was worth it. Rumors from prisoners of war suggested that the Luftwaffe was stockpiling synthetic fuel in hidden forest depots, shielding their supplies from the relentless destruction of oil refineries in Luna and Politz. If true, these reserves could prolong Germany's ability to keep its aircraft airborne at a critical moment in the war. The team selected for the mission, 2 Americans from OSS Operational Group Ravenwood, and 1 British SOE operative, trained intensively for the wooded terrain. They rehearsed silent movement, camouflage techniques, and emergency evasion procedures. Their equipment included an RS-6 spy radio, carefully crated to survive the jump, and special reconnaissance cameras designed to function in low light. One operative, Lieutenant Alan Graves, later wrote in his personal notes, "We were prepared for the trees but not the silence. You didn't just listen for danger, you listened for anything that wasn't natural. A twig snapping could be your only warning." The insertion took place on the night of May 9, 1944. The operatives boarded a Halifax bomber operated by No. 161 Squadron RAF, the unit famous for delivering agents into Europe under the cloak of darkness. Heavy cloud cover and intermittent rain forced the aircraft to fly low across the Alps, its engines echoing faintly off the peaks. As they neared their drop zone near the Regen River, the Halifax encountered the first sign of trouble: Luftwaffe night fighters patrolling farther south than expected. Their presence indicated a shift in German air defense patterns, one Allied analyst had not predicted. Still, the drop proceeded. The operatives descended into the forest shadows, landing amid thick underbrush that muffled their movements. They cached their parachutes, assembled their gear, and began the long trek toward a prearranged hide site in the hills east of Cham. Dawn found them exhausted but intact, concealed beneath a natural overhang that shielded them from aerial observation. During the first 2 days, their reconnaissance efforts appeared promising. They observed unusual transport activity along a forest road, convoys of fuel tankers guarded by Luftwaffe personnel rather than army units. They also recorded the faint rumble of industrial machinery deep within the tree line, far from any known factory. This noise, accompanied by sporadic plumes of smoke rising through the canopy, suggested the presence of a hidden facility. If confirmed, it would become a significant strategic target for Allied bombers. But radio communication proved nearly impossible. Every attempt to transmit their findings resulted in heavy interference. At first, they blamed atmospheric conditions. Then they noticed the pattern. Whenever they attempted to broadcast, the interference intensified as though directed at them. The Germans had deployed mobile jamming units in the region, an indication that they suspected covert activity or were protecting something vital. Tension mounted. On their third night, the team spotted a German patrol moving methodically along the ridge above their hide site. The patrol carried dogs, an unmistakable sign that they were searching for infiltrators. The operatives relocated under cover of darkness, traveling deeper into the forest toward a cluster of abandoned hunting lodges marked on pre-war maps. One of these structures belonged to a noble family known for quiet anti-Nazi sentiment. The agents hoped it might serve as a temporary shelter. Inside the lodge, they found more than shelter, they found clues. A ledger with coded initials. Charcoal sketches of what appeared to be fuel tanks buried beneath camouflage netting. And a half-burned note containing a cryptic sentence in German. The supply trains will not be traced if the deliveries continue through the southern route. These discoveries suggested the existence of a secret distribution network that bypassed major rail hubs entirely. As they attempted another radio transmission, the static grew overwhelming. A single word slipped through before the signal collapsed. Movement. The message reached an OSS listening station in Cairo, its analysts unable to determine whether it referred to enemy patrols, convoys, or a forced retreat. At dawn the next day, the team heard engines approaching, multiple vehicles navigating the narrow forest road. The sound was unmistakable. They dismantled their radio, buried their documents, and prepared to vanish into the terrain. What happened next remains uncertain. Some historians believe they evaded capture, living off the land until making contact with Czech partisans weeks later. Others suggest the opposite, that they were taken by a specialized German hunt team and their fate concealed in wartime secrecy. All that is known for certain is that the radio fell silent after that final burst. And in the wake of their disappearance, Allied command faced a chilling question. Had the Germans uncovered their pattern of infiltration? The answer would shape the dangerous final drop still to come. By June 1944, the pattern was unmistakable. Each OSS insertion into Germany revealed valuable intelligence, yet each also left behind a trail of silence, missing operatives, or contradictory signals. Still, the Allies pressed on. The looming invasion of Normandy meant every fragment of knowledge about German logistics, fuel supplies, and covert industrial efforts could influence the course of the war. As planners reviewed the failed transmissions from Bavaria, a new lead emerged. Scattered intelligence reports hinted at a hidden fuel distribution corridor running through the Bavarian forests toward a cluster of SS-controlled depots near Regensburg. The potential strategic value of confirming this was immense. It set the stage for the fourth drop, the mission that would stretch Allied daring to the breaking point. The new objective was simple but perilous: locate the exact positions of fuel stockpiles rumored to be supplying a reserve of Luftwaffe units preparing for counteroffensives. Allied bombing had crippled Germany's synthetic fuel plants, but if the Luftwaffe had shielded sizable reserves, their fighters and bombers could still threaten the invasion fleet and supply lines in France. Ground confirmation was essential. High-altitude reconnaissance produced only blurred images, and resistance reports remained vague, likely distorted by German misinformation campaigns. The OSS saw no choice but to attempt yet another insertion behind enemy lines. The selected team consisted of 2 Americans, Sergeant Philip Renner, a skilled signals operator, and Captain Thomas Hale, known for his uncanny ability to navigate wooded terrain, and a British SOE operative, Corporal Edwin Marsh, who had previously run supply lines in the Ardennes. Despite the growing sense of unease surrounding these missions, morale remained high. Hale wrote a brief note during training: "It won't be the first time the forest has swallowed us. And if it does, it will be for a greater purpose." The insertion aircraft, AB-24 modified for special operations, lifted off from Temsford on the night of June 22, 1944. Weather reports promised clear skies, but as the Liberator crossed into German airspace, thick clouds closed in, obscuring the moonlight and creating blind pockets that forced the pilot to fly lower than intended. The crew soon realized they were drifting off the planned flight path, an error potentially disastrous for a covert drop. Moments later, Luftwaffe night fighters were spotted circling above the Danube. The B-24 dove sharply to avoid radar detection, skimming treetop height in complete darkness. Inside, the 3 operatives steadied themselves, knowing that any deviation from their intended landing zone would complicate their entire mission. Still, the drop proceeded. The operatives tumbled into a section of dense forest east of Straubing, several kilometers south of the intended site. Supplies were scattered. Renner lost his secondary battery pack in the fall. Hale landed in a thicket of briar brush that tore his uniform and left several cuts across his arms. Marsh, the last to hit the ground, landed safely but reported hearing distant engines approaching almost immediately, an ominous sign that German patrols were close. By dawn, the team had regrouped and established a temporary hide area in a natural hollow beneath the roots of a massive beech tree. They spent most of the day listening. Trucks rumbled occasionally in the distance. Aircraft passed overhead with irregular frequency. The forest itself felt alive, shifting between silence and sudden bursts of unnatural sound. The men noticed something else: intervals of rhythmic static on their wireless set, even when it was turned off. At first they dismissed it as interference leaking from nearby power lines, but there were no power lines in the vicinity. Later historians would speculate that German jamming equipment or experimental radar systems may have been operating in the area. On their second night, the operatives began reconnaissance. They moved southward toward a series of hills that locals, according to earlier intelligence, referred to as the Black Ridge. Navigating by compass and starlight, they followed tire tracks partially concealed beneath layers of pine needles. The trail channeled them into a secluded valley where they found the first physical evidence of their target: a row of large cylindrical containers buried at the base of a hillside, partially covered with brush. The containers were steel, roughly 4 meters long, and bore faint Luftwaffe markings. Hale photographed them with a miniature Tessina camera, whispering, "They're hiding an ocean of fuel down here." But when Renner attempted to radio their discovery back to Allied listening stations, the interference became overwhelming. Static roared through the set. Signal strength dropped to nearly nothing. And then, without warning, a new sound cut through the noise, a sharp, oscillating hum unlike anything they had heard before. It lasted only seconds but was enough to convince them they risked giving away their position if they continued transmitting. At dawn, the team withdrew deeper into the valley. While resting beneath an outcrop, Marsh discovered fresh boot prints, German, but not from regular infantry. They were the distinctive pattern used by specialized SS patrols. The realization chilled the operatives. Someone else knew about this valley and they weren't casual wanderers. That night, a convoy approached from the east, 3 trucks accompanied by 2 armored cars bearing SS insignia. The operatives watched from concealment as personnel unloaded crates and fueled auxiliary tanks hidden beneath camouflage netting. The scale of the operation was larger than anyone had anticipated, perhaps large enough to sustain entire Luftwaffe squadrons for weeks. Then came the moment that sealed their fate. As the team attempted one final radio burst, just a few coded words, the jamming intensified so violently that Renner feared the equipment was overheating. The message carried only one interpretable word before the connection died: stockpile. German patrols fanned across the forest the following day. The operatives scattered, seeking higher ground, but the terrain worked against them. By nightfall, the radio had gone silent for good. Some post-war files suggest one operative survived and was later recovered by Czech partisans. Others argue the team was captured by an SS detachment trained to hunt infiltrators. No definitive records exist. The truth of what happened in that forest remains a mystery, overshadowed by the final and most perilous drop still to come: the forbidden operation near Stuttgart. In the final weeks before the Allied landings in Normandy, a tremor of unease rippled through the upper ranks of the OSS. 3 previous penetrations into Germany had produced invaluable intelligence, factory schematics, evidence of hidden fuel reserves, glimpses of underground facilities, but each had been overshadowed by a troubling pattern: missing operatives, garbled transmissions, and unexplained German countermeasures that seemed to anticipate Allied movements. Yet the pressure to continue was immense. 4 months, aerial reconnaissance had been unable to verify a suspected courier route linking top SS officials with industrial leaders in the Stuttgart region. If proven real, this shadow network could reveal secrets about resource allocation, internal dissent, or even back-channel negotiations within the collapsing Reich. The stakes were too significant to abandon. Thus, the OSS authorized the 5th and final drop, an operation more daring than any attempted before. The target zone lay on the outskirts of Stuttgart, where dense pockets of woodland met a patchwork of small farms and factory extensions. Wartime records indicate that the city was a nexus for military production, home to Daimler-Benz plants and experimental engineering facilities tied to the Panther tank and various radar systems. But buried within this industrial sprawl was something else: rumors of a courier chain that bypassed official military channels, allowing select SS officers to move sensitive documents, microfilm, and coded messages across southern Germany. Allied command wanted to know why such a route existed and what it carried. 4 operatives were selected for the mission: 2 Americans, Lieutenant Samuel Keene and Sergeant Mark Lyle, one British SOE decoder, Evelyn Rowe, and a seasoned OSS infiltrator known only by his code name, Hendricks. Their combined skills formed a formidable team: cryptography, covert movement, radio expertise, and deep knowledge of German industrial geography. Yet even during preparation, signs of unease surfaced. Training files record that their instructors noticed an unusual predictability in Luftwaffe patrols along the flight corridor, as though the Germans were expecting something. An intelligence analyst later wrote, "We knew they were watching the skies. The problem was we didn't know why." The insertion aircraft, a specially modified C-47 operated by the Royal Air Force's secretive 138 Squadron, departed on the night of May 27, 1944. The weather was clear, but visibility worked against them. Moonlight illuminated the fields and forests below, making detection more likely. As the plane crossed into Württemberg, it encountered unusually organized searchlight patterns, arranged not for anti-aircraft targeting but for triggering early detection. The crew reacted instantly, diving to treetop level. The passengers felt every jolt as branches whipped against the fuselage. Despite the danger, the jump was executed. Parachutes opened silently in the cool night air, depositing the operatives in a narrow meadow east of Fellbach. They gathered their gear and moved swiftly toward a cluster of abandoned vineyard storage huts, perfect for temporary concealment. Here, in the protection of thick stone walls, they prepared for their first night of reconnaissance. Their objective: intercept the courier chain. To do so, they had been briefed on a railway spur used exclusively by SS personnel. It operated irregularly and carried no civilian cargo. A small number of workers in the area had reported unusual activity: trucks arriving without headlights, officers carrying locked metal cases, and whispered references to orders from the south. That phrase caught Allied analysts' attention. It hinted at communications that circumvented the official hierarchy of the German High Command. On their second night, the team positioned themselves along a wooded ridge overlooking a small railway junction. Sergeant Lyle, using a compact spotting scope, observed what he believed to be the courier exchange. 3 SS officers accompanied by an industrial engineer from Daimler-Benz. They carried cases reinforced with steel corners, guarded with a level of intensity normally reserved for state secrets. The operatives photographed everything: license plates, insignia, officer ranks, even footprints left in the soil. But as they prepared to withdraw, something shifted. Rowe, stationed at the rear, detected faint Morse signals on her portable receiver, signals that were not theirs. Someone nearby was transmitting. And the transmission bore a chilling resemblance to Allied shortwave patterns, as though mimicking them. This was no accident. The Germans were hunting for infiltrators and using imitation signals to flush them out. The team returned to their hide site and prepared a coded burst for London. The message was concise, urgent: confirmation of courier activity, SS industrial cooperation, and the presence of hostile radio mimicry. Keane sent it at 3:19 hours. Evidence suggests the Germans intercepted the transmission within minutes. At dawn, they spotted movement: SS tracking teams advancing in disciplined formations along the vineyard steps. Each man carried a rifle and a trained dog. The operatives scattered, splitting into pairs to reach alternative extraction points. Hendricks and Rowe fled north, aiming for a safe house linked to a resistance sympathizer. Keane and Lyle pushed east toward forest cover. What followed is pieced together only from fragmented post-war statements. Keane and Lyle were ambushed near a dry creek bed. Lyle was killed instantly. Keane escaped into the forest, wounded but mobile. Days later, he made contact with Czech resistance fighters near the border, collapsing from blood loss but still clutching the miniature camera containing the mission's photographic evidence. Hendricks and Rowe were never seen again. Keane's eventual debriefing, classified for decades, hinted at something extraordinary. The courier cases, he claimed, contained documents detailing not only fuel distributions and weapons transfers but also high-level dissent among industrial leaders who doubted Germany's chances of victory. Some files referenced indirect attempts to communicate with neutral nations. If true, these revelations suggested cracks within the Nazi leadership that historians still debate today. The OSS buried the entire mission beneath layers of classification. Official records listed it as inconclusive. Unofficially, it was regarded as the most valuable and the most costly of the 5 forbidden drops. Yet one question continued to haunt Allied analysts: how did the Germans counter their movements so precisely? The answer, if it exists, may lie somewhere between Stuttgart and the mountains beyond, where the final mysteries of these forbidden operations continue to linger. In the aftermath of the 5th OSS drop, The air inside Allied intelligence rooms grew tense and quiet. The silence wasn't merely the absence of radio signals, it was the silence of unanswered questions, of operations launched at great cost and ending in darkness. Each mission had produced invaluable fragments, sketches of underground rocket factories, evidence of hidden fuel reserves, photographs of clandestine courier exchanges. Yet each had also left behind gaps that no post-war archive has ever fully filled. The OSS, determined to understand the pattern behind these disappearances, ordered a consolidated review of all 5 missions. What they discovered was more troubling than anticipated. The review, conducted in a sealed room beneath Grosvenor Square, brought together analysts from the OSS, SOE, and select U.S. Army Air Forces officers. On the table lay scattered intelligence, coded transmissions, Luftwaffe patrol logs, captured German documents, and surviving field notes from the few operatives who made it back alive. A map of Germany filled the wall, each insertion marked with a colored pin. To the analyst's surprise, the pins formed an arc, an invisible boundary that seemed to align with a string of strategic German installations not fully identified during the war. More unsettling was the discovery that German counterintelligence had reacted with unusual speed to each drop. Luftwaffe patrols flew in patterns too precise for coincidence. SS tracking teams arrived in locations far from major troop centers. Even civilian informants seemed to respond to Allied movements almost immediately. Whether by luck, skill, or some more subtle intelligence mechanism, the Germans had been exceptionally prepared. The OSS could neither explain nor ignore it. One memo written by an SOE officer captured the mood. "We are not dealing with isolated events. Germany's internal defenses appear to adapt with unnatural speed. Either our networks are penetrated or their detection systems are more extensive than previously believed." Yet no definitive proof emerged of a leak within Allied ranks. Likewise, captured German files revealed no unified counterintelligence operation specifically targeting these OSS drops. The mystery tightened instead of loosening. Meanwhile, in Europe, the war accelerated. Normandy had been invaded. Paris was liberated. German forces began their long collapse toward their homeland. Yet even as Allied armies pushed into the Reich, many of the areas where the OSS teams had operated remained contested or inaccessible. The Harz Mountains, Bavaria's forests, and the corridors near Stuttgart became battlegrounds, pounded by artillery and torn by retreating units. Any surviving evidence, documents hidden by operatives, buried radios, photographic caches, was likely destroyed in the chaos. In early 1945, Lieutenant Samuel Keene, the sole survivor of the 5th drop, was brought to Washington for further debriefing. His testimony added both clarity and confusion. He confirmed that the courier cases carried documents suggesting internal dissent within segments of the German industrial elite. But he also emphasized something else. The German hunters seemed to know exactly where to look, as if guided by intuition. They weren't searching, he insisted. They were going to locations already chosen. As if they had a map we didn't know existed. Analysts debated his claim for years. When the war ended in May 1945, Allied intelligence teams rushed into the regions tied to the forbidden drops. They found remnants of abandoned fuel depots, burned papers near old factory sites, and traces of underground installations hastily evacuated by German workers. But they found no explicit records detailing countermeasures against Allied infiltrators. No logs of captured OSS operatives. No centralized command that explained the uncanny precision of the German response. Some historians later argued that Germany's radar and radio direction finding capabilities were more advanced than the Allies realized. Others pointed to the efficiency of local Gestapo networks. A smaller group offered a third possibility. The OSS underestimated how much of the local population lived under surveillance, and how quickly any suspicious movement, an unfamiliar face, an unusual noise in the forest, a missed curfew, could spread through official and unofficial channels. In such an environment, even the most careful infiltrators could be tracked without the enemy ever knowing exactly who they were. Still, the unanswered questions persisted. Why did the Germans devote such disproportionate resources to these regions? Why were the intercepted transmissions so consistently jammed? And why did so few operatives return alive, despite detailed planning and experienced personnel? After the war, the OSS was dissolved and absorbed into new U.S. intelligence organizations. With it, many wartime files were sealed, misplaced, or buried in bureaucratic transitions. The missions became footnotes in classified reports, acknowledged but unexplained. Even today, historians accessing declassified material find entire pages redacted or missing. Names of operatives vanish mid-document. References to German countermeasures appear without explanation. The puzzle remains incomplete. And yet, one truth endures. Those 5 forbidden drops shaped Allied understanding of Germany's hidden wartime infrastructure. They produced intelligence that influenced bombing priorities, supply chain assessments, and post-war investigations into industrial complicity. But they also left behind a legacy of unresolved stories, agents who walked into the Reich and left no trace except for brief, crackling radio bursts in the night. In the end, the OSS called them necessary risks. History calls them something else. Operations that reveal how even in a war defined by massive armies and colossal battles, some of the most consequential moments unfolded in silence, deep inside enemy territory, where a handful of operatives carried the weight of secrets that remain only partially uncovered.